Good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be in University of Wisconsin-Madison. Thanks to Michelle and the group for inviting me. What I'm going to cover is some reflection about dairy production systems in Peru. I'm going to touch on three topics: milk production under the context of food production systems in Peru. Then I'm going to go specifically on milk production itself. I'm going to finalize on the linkage between climate change and milk production, including the LCA appraisal that we have done for prevalent production systems in my country. As a context, you know this very prime chemical reaction. Can you tell me what is showing the picture? What's the main biological process that is being shown there? It begins with F. Photosynthesis. It's the photosynthesis, isn't it? Food production is based on photosynthesis. And photosynthesis is a biochemical process. And for this, you need various components. Light energy. We need oxygen, produce oxygen. We need CO2, but we need soil and water. So I'm going to pay some attention about this soil as an important component of the food production systems in general, and then I'm going to relate that to milk production. This is land use in the States. You should be familiar with that, maybe. Of the total land in the States, there is non-agricultural land and agricultural land. There's a good proportion of the total as agricultural one. But that's not the case everywhere. And that affects food production systems. You can see this number. Peru, 19% of the total area is arable land. In the States, it's 44. So there is quite large difference. In Canada, it's 7% of the total land. Of course, there is a lot of forest, isn't it?
They have too much land anyway.
Pardon me?
They have too much land anyway in Canada.
Yeah, but you have also persons per square kilometer. Look at China, 145, and they have very small amount of land. We can compound that in this last column, arable land, hectares per person. And what I want to persuade you is to see those numbers. That's the potential for a country to have food production. And you can see there is blessed countries like Argentina, almost 1 hectare of arable land per Argentinian. And there are less blessed people like Chinese or Peruvians. We have 1/10 of an hectare per person of arable land. So what I want to stress is that the resources that a country has determines in an important way what food production we can have in the country, and as a consequence, we import or we export food. Let's talk something about, please, if you have any question or comment as I'm going through the presentation, please feel free to interrupt me. So in milk production in Peru, Peru land related to agriculture is mainly land in the Andes. And our people for centuries have tried to cope with the difficulties of available land for people using different strategies to solve the problem. One strategy is this sloping cropping in the slopes. This lady is having cattle in these slopes in the highlands. We have mixed crop systems. A mixed crop system, livestock crop systems, it means this lady has cattle and has crops. But the important point is that both needs to be adapted to the conditions of these Andes. Can you maybe mention some, please, sir, some possible characteristic of the Andes that could affect crop animal production?
Sure. The topography.
Topography is one very good example. Very steep. Do you think we can mechanize agriculture there? It will be easy to mechanize? I mean, the corn belt in the States is flat. You can put tractors, heavy ones, and the properties are 1,000, 2,000, 100, 300 hectares. There, the size is less than 1 hectare. Okay, please, sir.
And also elevation.
Also, it's the altitude. Guess what altitude is that lady now, or these crops? Guess what altitude? Is higher than wherever place you do cropping in America. Colorado is maybe 2,000 meters. These are at 4,000 meters above sea level. And what's the effect of altitude on crops? Any idea?
It's going to be colder.
It's colder, and there is an event that is very important. Begins with F.
Fiber.
Begins with F.
Frost.
Frost. And that's very important. The prevalence of frosty days that kill plants is very high. So when we try to cope with the difficulty of arable land in our country, and I have shown you that comparatively to the States, food production in Peru is very scarce, very limited. We don't have that chunk of soil that is a pre-requirement to have food. But then in these places we have, you said one problem, it's slopes. You said another problem, altitude that determines problems of frost. In animals, can we cope with high altitude easily? Is it normal to be at 4,000 meters above sea level?
Not super normal, but you can live there.
Okay, 5% of Peruvians cannot cope with that. Peru is very his economic growth is based on mining. So when people is hired or is in evaluation for mining, they send to the clinic in order to check if they are going to cope with the high altitude, because mining coexists with this. And 5% of those people will never be able to cope with the altitude, so they are not hired. So the animals also needs to be adapted to that if we want to have livestock there. Is cattle native to America, sir? Is cattle an animal native to America?
Cattle? No.
No, definitively no. And what is the livestock native of the Andes? Any idea, please? If it is not cattle, it's not sheep, it's not horses. It's alpacas, are the camelids. So 1,000 years ago, we developed a livestock industry based on camelids. But with time passes, we have added livestock like cattle. Okay, let's go ahead. This is the trend of milk production from the last 10 years. 4.5% increase per year. Very successful industry, looks like that, isn't it? But you can see the per capita. The per capita intake in fluid milk equivalent is, of course, growing, but it is still at 60 kilos. Any idea about what is the milk equivalent intake in America? Is 120, Michelle?
In
Fluid in North America.
in North America?
Yeah.
At least.
There is double.
Yes.
That means if we want to have that quality of product in our diet, we are not self-sufficient, isn't it? We are half. And if I tell you that 25% of that is imported, then there is a larger problem, isn't it? So dairy production in Peru is an important activity for income of families, but it's also an important activity in order to contribute to food security. And we think we need to do more in order to continue increasing milk production, in order to overcome the difficulties when we have an important component of the diet that is imported. What's the problem of having an important food product imported? Do you see any problem? Do you see any problem? For example? Pardon me?
I don't know.
Okay.
There's
Do you see any problem?
Safety.
That's called a component of food security, isn't it? I mean, we would like to have more own production that will counterpart if there is high prices of something. And if it is an important food component, then we need to think on ways to improve that. So the per capita is still low. Part of the per capita is imported. We are growing, but we are not getting to the point that we would like to. If we see the structure of the industry, where I'm pointing out, is something similar to what Professor Carlos Arriaga indicated. This called informal market. And he delivered some ideas about what an informal market is. You see the importance, 60% of the milk goes to informal markets. Any idea of what consequences have that? Here there is not a large informal market.
Health and possibly brings down prices also.
Pardon me?
Health problems and also might bring down
Health
prices.
problems that are possible associated to the food component. Others, sir?
You mentioned prices could be different.
There is not stability in prices. It's not included in the formal economy of the country, so they cannot have easily loans, isn't it? I mean, if I don't exist in the formal economy, can I knock the doors of the bank to ask for money? I don't exist for them. So it's an important issue for these production systems of milk that the industry is like that. Informal market is the majority. Then, if I tell you that the industry is highly concentrated, that means two buyers buy 80% of that industrial milk. What's the consequence on those situations when you only have two buyers that buy 80% of what you produce?
They have more of a control over the price.
They have a more control on the price of the product, isn't it? Is it healthy for the producer? No, that makes difficulties. So you can begin to see some issues about the milk industry in Peru. Let me present now the second graphic. Less than 5 hectares are 59 producers of milk in Peru. This is exactly similar to plant production. Small producers are the larger components of the food production system in Peru and in many places of the world. This is what we call the family business, isn't it? The family agriculture. And that means they have characteristics intrinsic to the systems that needs to be understood in order to be improved. This is a profile of Peru that maybe adds some information about the environment. This is where it is Lima, is in the Pacific Ocean, right in the coast, South Pacific coast. You see, this is very narrow coast, 150 kilometers. Then we go abruptly to the Andes. Andes, and then we go abruptly to the Amazonian. The Amazonian River begins in the Andes. So the water that is catched in the Andes finalizes in the Atlantic Ocean, forming this big river that is the Amazonian. So where do we have cropping land? In the Andes. Is it of good conditions? No, because of the steepness, not because of the altitude, not because of the events of frost. Where do we have good land? In the coast. Is it big comparing to the whole country? No, it's very minute. As a consequence, our prevalence systems is what we call pastoral one, a smallholder, production 2 to 4 kilos per cow. Located in the Andes. The pasture is heavily affected by what we call the dry season. Any idea, please, about what we call dry season? In a pastoral system, we identify rainy and dry seasons. What will be a dry season?
A drought? I don't know.
Doesn't rain. So that's the 6 month precipitation, so the pasture grows well. The other 6 months, if it doesn't rain, very low growth. What happens to milk production? If you don't have food, you have low production. So there is a heavy seasonal effect on livestock production in general. The cattle wins weight during the rainy season and loses weight in the dry season. In the balance, they win a little. Okay, and I'm introducing this because one of the most important effects of climate change is extending the effect, the negative effect of the dry season. That's one of the main consequences of climatic change in many places of the world. It's affecting the availability of water. It's affecting increasing the variability in the availability of water. And that in these systems affects the already negative consequences of the dry seasons. Please.
Is the dry season in the summer or like the?
The dry season in our part of the world is from April to September. And that's also where the more frost is. Any comment or question, please?
So kind of dry season is associated with lower temperature.
That's right. And high prevalence of frost. Please.
What percentage of all of the people in Peru are smallholder farmers? 'Cause
From the
I assume it's a lot more than in the U.S. And how does that affect food?
From the standpoint of agricultural producers, around 80%. And from the standpoint of Peruvians dedicated to agriculture, around 25. Those are much larger numbers than in the States, of course, as a percentage. Both the proportion in agriculture and of that, the proportion in small farmers. Any question, please? Accompanying this reality of nature, dry season, climatic change affecting seasonal pattern of precipitation, we have limited use of technology. applied to this livestock husbandry. What will be some sustainability issues in this system? This is a social component, organizational component. That means communal land. And that's prevalent in different places in the world. In Asia, in Africa, in the Andes. That means this is big chunks of land that this property is of many of these families. They don't have private allocation of sites in the Andes. It's communal land. And that has been historically a way to protect the resource. If we do private, this gentleman can take a decision that would affect the others. But that imposes as well difficulties to organize the production. Yes, sir.
Is it public land, like government-owned land?
No,
Or
it's completely different to in the States. In the States, the government is federal, and you give a license to somebody to manage the range. This case, they have titles of property as a community to places in the Andes. So it's a completely different system. Any question, please? Yes, sir.
So what prevents one community of taking someone else's land?
Pardon me?
What prevents someone from taking someone else's land?
The law protects communal land. That's the reason I'm saying it's a sustainability issue problem. Because the land by law belongs to all the members of the community, and I cannot sell my share of the property. You say, and why it affects sustainability? Because if they don't control overgrazing, what happens to the resource? You begin to put it in risk, isn't it? Overgraze means you put more animals than the system can maintain. So if they don't correct that, you affect the stability of the system. Other issue that affects sustainability of these lands is competitiveness in an open market. I mean, Peru has signed tens of free trade agreements worldwide. I mean, can these systems compete with other systems? Not only in milk, can they compete in potatoes? Can they compete in other crops? That affects the economic sustainability of the system. I mean, there are issues related to the system that not necessarily mean that they are competitive to others. Yes, sir.
Are smallholders in Peru trying to compete nationally, globally? Because from what I think, or what I perceive, smallholders are trying to maintain their families and communities and not trying to, I don't know, make a profit as much.
So maybe I'm going to clarify my statement. I'm saying that they are not competitive in the sense, okay, they produce milk. If New Zealanders produce milk cheaper in Lima, they are going to lose business. In that sense, I'm saying that they can lose competitiveness. If other in the world or in other regions of the country can produce what they do at lower price, they won't be sustainable for a long time. And that's a risk. I don't know if that clarifies my statement. I mean, I agree with you. They are not thinking, am I competitive with New Zealanders? They are not in that way of thinking. I am doing the analysis. Will they be able to compete? The industry will go there to buy, or they will go to the Callao port and receive powder from New Zealand. They will go to the port to buy dry milk powder. Okay, any question, please, or comment? You see, this is what you have here, but livestock don't have shelves, shades, and they don't have silage. That's associated again to other factor of competitiveness That's economy of scale. We have 3 livestock. Can I hire a veterinarian easily if I have 3 cows? Can I afford to hire a veterinarian? Very difficult, isn't it? The concept of economy of scale is very important. And I mentioned that also, climate change. So on the top of the other factors, we are adding a new factor, isn't it? And I explained it already, what is one of the impacts of climate change. We have, by the other side, the intensive systems. Like in many places in the States, in Arizona, in California, in Florida, or in Torreon in Mexico as well. Medium and large holders. They use corn forage and they supplement with concentrate. They have highly specialized animals. They don't have as much productivity as Wisconsin, but they want to go there. One difficulty, as land is not a lot available, we need to use other resources. And those resources that we use are agro-industrial byproducts. Guess what is this one to the right? This is an agricultural byproduct. You eat that here, something similar. Begins with A, asparagus. 30% of the harvest comes here. 70% comes to the States. So there's a lot, you see? I mean, 30% of the harvest is a byproduct. And that's a very good byproduct. Peru is the 3rd worldwide exporter of asparagus now. The same happens with artichoke. This is artichoke, look at that. Again, 50% in that case of the harvest comes here in a can, and 50% is this that goes to the mouth of the cow. Artichoke.
What part of the artichoke is it? Is it like the stem?
What we eat is covered by other parts, and that's this.
Same thing with the asparagus?
The asparagus, this is the asparagus, the regrow is what you cut, but 30% doesn't have the caliber, 30% is squeeze that you don't like to see in the can, but it's a byproduct, valuable byproduct when we don't have land for corn silage, you see. So we have developed responses to that. But of course, we are eating all this. Where do we get the silage for the cow if we don't have a lot of land? Look at this. What is this? This is, you help me, Carlos, pimiento, how do you say?
Pepper.
Pepper.
Bell pepper.
Okay. Of course, in this type of production, there is more application of technology. We use supplies from the States for this. What are the sustainability issues? As I said, availability of local feed. You see, they are eating this red one, the asparagus. Competitiveness, again, in relation to international prices. Environmental regulations are beginning to be applied to this type of systems.
Does that milk taste funny?
Pardon me?
Does the milk taste funny from the cows that are eating the peppers?
Not really, because the ruminant is blessed.
Well, if they eat garlic, it tastes like garlic. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
garlic is very powerful. An important issue is also how competitive is milk against asparagus. If I have 100 hectares of land, do I use that for corn forage or do I use that for asparagus? The answer immediately is I use that for asparagus. So the competitiveness of use of land also is a limiting factor for sustainability of the system. Of course, I'm talking about competitiveness. How are milk prices? Canada is the country in the world, one of the countries that have the highest prices worldwide of milk. That's the black color here, above 60 cents per 100 equivalent of milk. Peru is in the lower range, is in the 30. But other countries are even lower, in the 20, in the New Zealand area. So this is an important issue about sustainability of the milk or whatever other product system. But this is other part of the equation. What's the price of the inputs? And the main input for livestock is feed. You can see here, this is a combination of corn and soybean. It's an index, let's say. And this is the feed prices. Peru is more expensive feed, and we get paid less for the milk than in other parts of the world. So that's risky, isn't it? Our inputs are more expensive comparatively to what we receive per liter of milk. That's what I'm saying, that there is a risk based on competitiveness of the production when we compare with situations in other parts of the world. Technical assistance is a very important issue in food production. I had the privilege to go to New Zealand twice to visit the dairy sector. If you go today, all the extension is private. The farmer pays for his extension. But when you begin asking, 30 years ago, all the extension was paid by the government. And the fertilizer, that is the most expensive input in a pastoral system like the New Zealander, was subsidized by the government. So they created an industry based on political decision at the central government. In our countries, at least in Peru, that has not happened, and that is not happening. So technical assistance is a difficulty to overcome. You here in the States take 100 years ago also the decision to do the same. You said, I'm going to build a public extension service for agriculture. And you invested lots of resources on that. And you created these big universities doing experimental stations in all the states, helping the farmer to be competitive. In a place where you are blessed by soil, a lot of soil per capita. So you are winners, isn't it? For us to be winners, we need more inputs, because we are beginning late, isn't it? We are competing now with super chattels that go fast, and we are walking, you know? Okay. Let's skip that. This is a description of a production chain in the highlands for milk. We have a small, medium, and large producers. Our large producers are 20 cows, you see. Our small is 2 cows. And we have always this informal market and self-consumption and this formal market. We have different ways of milk processing. Of course, we sell still fresh milk without pasteurization. We eat very common raw fresh cheese. Although there are regulations, they are not fulfilled at the market. How can you fulfill when 90% of the cheese is like that? It's very difficult to overcome fast, isn't it? When 90% of the market is like that. Fresh cheese without pasteurization in the informal market. Of course, there is the formal market, but that is not the majority. Our capital, Lima, and I was doing the comparison with Mexico, Mexico has 25 million the capital, and 140 million total, isn't it?
117.
Pardon me?
117 million.
120 million. In Peru, the capital has 10, and we are 30 million Peruvians. So the capital concentrates much more people, isn't it? And that's our market for food products, isn't it? 1/3 of the Peruvians live in Lima. And that's where the industrial milk mainly goes. We conducted, I would say, very extensive work with FAO, trying to say, which will it be the first area that you will work with in order to impact favorably in milk production in Peru? And the response was pasture management, both native and cultivated, as the main factor that, considering comparison with others, will get larger impact with not much investment. Let me enter to the third part, climate change and milk production. I like this graphic because it helps understand that climate change has impacts, and the responses that we need to think are at two sides: adaptation strategies and mitigation strategies. And that's the first class that we do with students when we are introducing the concept of climate change and food production. Climate change has positive and negative impacts on food systems. If we ask about the non-good impacts, we need to think on adaptation and mitigation strategies. Maybe, sir, maybe can you help me? What will it be a mitigation? What would be a definition of mitigation strategy?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Any idea, please?
Well, a mitigation strategy would be
Like a definition, not an example.
Yep. Trying to cut down on the amount of greenhouse
Emissions.
gases produced.
Okay, emissions, nitrous oxides, methane. When I say I want to design a mitigation strategy, that means I identify the system and I say, what reasonable can I do to reduce emissions? And what will be an adaptation strategy?
Like maybe a recycling program or something that takes.
What would be a definition of adaptation strategy?
Like something that you are doing with. what's
Think at
already
the
there.
response issue. What will be an adaptation strategy? Something that you do to prevent the impact. Okay, so when we talk about climate change and food production systems, these are the two issues. I mean, mitigation is how we reduce climate change, isn't it? Adaptation is what we change so that what is happening affects me less. Okay. Guess in Peru, what are we more interested in, adaptation or mitigation? If you will be a Peruvian and you will take the decision now, and why?
It's such a tough one because mitigation prevents worse impacts in the future, but you do need to survive in the moment. So I think you have
That's
to work
exactly
on both.
what a Peruvian will think. Okay, and the Peruvian and the Mexican will immediately say, "Sorry, I produce 2% of the emissions, and I'm receiving full impact of the climate change." So there is another coin on the answer, isn't it? Or mitigation, not. I need to prioritize adaptation, isn't it? Like you said. So when we talk about food systems and climate change from the standpoint of responses to that, mitigation and adaptation are things to be considered. Let me present from the impact side and dairy production. We have climatic change, we have direct impacts. Direct impact is availability of water. As a consequence, food production. As a consequence, milk, fertility, health. Are those direct effects or indirect? Because climate change, the cow produces less milk in the Andes? Or it produces less milk because it affects amount of feed? What do you think? Is a direct or indirect effect?
Isn't it both, according to this?
Which is more in magnitude? Climate change means temperature is 2 degrees up Celsius. A cow that is in an environment of 10 degrees, if it go to 12, affects her? No.
Not as much, no.
But if I reduce pasture 20% because lack of water, so in general, climate change and livestock production, cattle-wise, the main effects, especially in thermoneutral conditions or cold conditions, are exclusively indirect, through affecting supply of feed. Is this more important in intensive or pastoral systems, sir?
What?
The effect of climate change on feed supply, is it more important in pastoral or in-house systems?
Pastoral?
In pastoral systems, for sure. That's the reason in countries like Peru, the climate change has larger impact on pastoral systems. And because pastoral systems are the more important for milk production or for meat production from cattle, these are very important effects. And if I go back now to the other, so we need to develop adaptation strategies. But that doesn't mean what you said. We need to think also proactively how our system can adapt, and hopefully we can also reduce emissions. I'm going to escape this. Just a minute only. Look, this is emissions in Peru. Total emissions in Peru. Equivalent CO2. Which is the most important source? Land use change. More than 50% is land use change. Completely different to the States. In the States, the most important is energy, like in the North countries. In countries like Peru and others, is land use. What is land use change? Is when you cut forest and you put something on that. You are cutting what captures CO2. Yes, Michel.
That was my question.
Okay. Okay, we had a question. Escape this. Just to introduce you about the LCA paper that Michel selected, because I sent him 4 papers and he selected that. So this was an exercise that we, yes, please.
Sorry, before you move to that last part, then going back to what you shared with us, and you've explained the effect of climate change primarily as the driver of diminishing water resources.
Okay.
But if temperature is going up, there will be a lot of other factors next to just water.
Correct.
One could argue that if the temperature goes up, you may actually potentially have more yield because it's going to be less cold, and the growing season may get longer and things like that. So can you elaborate a little bit on
Yeah, Michel has introduced, sorry, plant production is not as simple. It's not only a matter of water supply. Okay, that's true. However, we always think about what's the first limiting factor. And by saying that, I'm saying that water comes to be the first limiting factor. We can have more temperature, promoting more photosynthesis, but if you have the limit of water availability, that won't work. I mean, if you have pictures of the high peaks of the Andes, they were covered with beautiful snow. Now, that has diminished to 10% of that. So the melting of that means that water is going out of the Andes. That water won't come back. So that means year by year, the availability of water in the Andes is reducing. And as a consequence, the pattern of pasture production, that is the feed for the prevalent system, is diminishing. And that's affecting who most? The consumer or the producer? Who's being affected more? Me in Lima or the producer in the Andes? Who's more affected? Me in Lima, I can call by the phone and buy from New Zealand milk, isn't it? Or from the States. The producer can change his livelihood in the Andes? Can he change that easily? Does he have many options? I mean, a farmer here in Wisconsin, if nobody wants to buy corn, tomorrow what he puts? Soy. And if nobody wants to buy soy, he puts other crop, because the land allows that, isn't it? If you go to the Andes, the land doesn't allow much. They allow pasture. But this is a profound impact, climate change, on those livelihoods. Any question or comment, please? Yes.
I'm just thinking about how also less snowpack in the Andes would disrupt the ecosystem, because like the snow insulates the ground, which maybe some animals that burrow would depend upon, and so they could actually freeze if there's no snow, or maybe also insulating for plants as well.
Yeah, when we are asked the impacts of climate change, certainly we need to think on a lot of other impacts, and you are mentioning some of them that are reality. I was focusing my presentation on the impact of the commodity that I was presenting. Okay, so LCA, you know what it is, life cycle analysis or assessment. We decided to know a little bit more about emissions. Which are the prevalent systems? The small producer. We have small producers in the Andes, and we have small producers in the coast. We have large in the coast, but we have also small ones. This is a family herd that has maybe, in the article, I guess it says 12 cows. And this is a pastoral system in the Andes. So we want to ask to the response to the question, what are the patterns of emissions of each? And what are the sources of the emission? And why do we ask that? Any idea? Why do we ask those questions? Why do we want to know what are the sources, what are the amounts of emissions? Why do I need to do that? What do I want to do that? What purpose?
Do you know like how much you're contributing to the system?
Okay, and
I don't know.
There is not a target that needs that my producers tell him that. So the information for that purpose is not needed. Please.
To know where you can put in the most, where you can put putting an effort would cause the most reduction in greenhouse gas emissions? Like, which part of your system is producing the most?
As I said, we have two systems. Those exist. If I'm thinking about mitigating, it's important to know which emits more, isn't it? And second one, which part of the system explains that. Okay. So as I said, we contrasted two systems, small producers both. The small in the Andes, 2 kilos of milk per cow. The small in the coast, 19. They should be different, isn't it? Or it's only the climate that explains the difference? Will it be only the climate and the altitude? What other factor makes that a cow produce more than other, or than a crop produce more than other? The inputs, isn't it?
Yeah, the feed.
What input you think change? The feed supply. Okay, so they receive concentrate. The small in the Andes don't receive concentrate. They are fully pastoral. The ones in the coast only receive forage and concentrate. So we did the typical boundaries of the two systems, and we came with these values. This is equivalence of CO2 per kilo of milk. 13 for the highlands, 3 for the coast. So again, CO2 equivalence per kilo of milk corrected by energy, 13 versus small producers in the coast, 3. So from the standpoint of benchmarking or comparing, who would you prefer?
Well, the coast.
Pardon me?
I would prefer the coast, I think.
Which one? The coast. Of course, it's 3 equivalent per kilo against 13. Yeah, you were going to make a question.
But why? What's the major difference in the two systems?
What's the major difference? Look here, this is the equivalent from livestock, 2. The others are minute quantities. Look in the animals, in the small producer, 11 coming from animals. Remember what I said at the beginning, what's the production? This is 19 in the coast and 2 in the highlands. As the animal has more productivity, you dilute the amount of emission, and as a consequence, per kilo of milk, it gets to that number. So it's a linkage with productivity. Yes, please.
Why don't the highland producers feed the concentrate in addition to the grass?
That's a splendid question. That's a possible alternative to increase production and dilute emissions.
Is there a reason why they don't do it?
There is a reason, that is the cost of transportation of the concentrate to the highlands, as one of the reasons. But look here, and I am using your question, concentrate in the coast is the second component of emission. So if I will ask, explain, how does this come from? Soybean in the concentrate. Peru doesn't produce soybean, produces 0. And these cows eat soybean. Where does it come, the emission? From? We buy from the States. There is emissions in the production of soybean in the States, plus there is emissions in the transport from Louisiana port to Peru. So if in your same line, if I want to reduce the emissions of the coast system, what will I do? Replace American soybean for a local source of protein. And I will reduce that. So the LCA analysis gives me tools to think about how to manipulate emissions, to understand them. As a matter of fact, to finalize, one of the most advised activities to reduce emissions per kilo of milk is to increase productivity, changing management practices. If I change management practices, that doesn't have much cost comparatively. I increase production, I dilute emissions in more milk. Any question, please? Let's go ahead.
So there's plenty of soy produced in Bolivia and Brazil. Why don't you use soy from there?
That's a very interesting question. When we signed the free trade agreement with the States, there was one line there that said certain number of tons can come at a differential price than the free price, lower. We all, because of price, we buy American.
And then I have another question. So the farmers in the highlands don't use as advanced technology. Is that mostly because of an education barrier, or is there something else why they don't?
Your colleague said, okay, a way for them to improve environmentally will be to add concentrate, so they will increase productivity, they will dilute emissions, and it will be more similar to the cost. But what I said, okay, for that to be economically used in the highlands is very difficult. So me as an advisor, I need to be sensible about the suggestions, not only thinking in the technical exclusive side, but also in the bioeconomic advice. So that will be the difficulty. Included, okay, maybe somebody will subsidize the soybean, but then we will need to add the extension for that to be happening. Any comment or question, please? It's at 6 or 6:05 or 5:15? 5?
5:15.
Okay, I finalize, I guess. You see, I'm fast. You see, that's with more detail what the artichokes are. You see, those are the coverings of what you eat here in the States, artichokes.
Are they mixed with something?
No, they're
It's
just
straight
artichokes.
up.
That cow will eat 120 kilos of this plus 8 kilos of concentrate, and they produce 25 liters of milk daily. So those are responses because we have 20% of the arable land that you have here. And that's the response to the cheap soybean that you have because you have a lot of arable land per capita. The same like Argentina. Argentina competes with the States because it has double area per capita than the States. It's very difficult to be poor, a country like Argentina. 1 hectare per capita of arable land, double that an American has. So sometimes we do jokes. How can you be like you are if you are so rich? And that's a truly richness, isn't it? A truly richness to have a lot of arable land per capita. Okay, any question or comment, please?
You said Holstein is the most common breed there?
Thanks for the question. The small and medium producers in Peru that are the majority, they have what we call the criollo cattle. The criollo cattle is a no breed. It's a mix of different cattle that came from the Spanish when they came to the South America, and nobody did a genetic improvement process. As a consequence, they are a mixed type of genotype. When we want to increase the quality for milk production, we cross with Holstein or Brown Swiss, and then we improve the cattle. When you go to the coastal area, then you find the good celerity, ABS, Carnation, Delta, all the semen companies of America for Holstein.
So part of the production isn't just feed, it's a lot of genetics too.
No. No, I mean, we did a very interesting experiment. We had criollo cattle and improved cattle. They were eating the same. Of course, the improved cattle were producing 50% more. Then we improved the quality of milk to both. Both increase. Then we increase more the quality. Both increase. That means the criollo cattle can produce more without changing the genetics. Of course, till certain level, when it won't produce more if I don't add genetics. That means we are at a level where the expression of the genetics is not full because feed, because health, because of management. Okay. Any question? Okay. Oh, sorry, please.
I have a question. I don't know if you, it's not about dairy production. I'm wondering if you know anything about
what?
About quinoa production in Peru. It's been a lot more in demand in North America.
What do you know about quinoa production?
I don't know much.
What issue would you like to know?
I would like to know what challenges it faces because of climate change.
Okay, like all crops, quinoa is also affected by climate change. However, as your friend will know, genotype adapted to a place is less affected than one not adapted. That means quinoa, as it is native of the Andes, it is more adapted to whatever stress or environmental than other crop like wheat that I will put there. Peru is now exporting cropping 120,000 hectares of quinoa. It changed from 25,000 around 5 years ago. A splendid growth, 5 times more area of quinoa in 5 years. What was the reason for that?
We decided.
What moved the world? What moved the world? Pardon me?
People decided it was healthy.
That doesn't move the world. What moved the world? Money, cabaret, cabaret, money. Money, price. People, because what you said, I'm willing to pay. And the price went 8 times higher 1 year to another. As a consequence, immediately, what do? You change this crop to quinoa. Go ahead.
Is it replacing other crops, or is that a big driver in the land use change?
When you have less land, do you have lazy land? When you don't have many land, is it lazy? You don't use it? No. So what we did? We replace other crops. So that we replace other crops because we don't have lazy land. All land is occupied. If now I have a pressure, good pressure, because somebody is willing to pay, I change. Yes, please.
Do you ever feed cows quinoa then?
There's lots. I'm just saying, there's lots of it.
There is lots of it, well paid. $5 a kilo.
Okay. So
it's better to just
Corn costs us $0.50 per kilo. I will never. Peruvians have not increased the consumption of quinoa because we cannot afford it. Yes, please.
That's what I was going to say. I was talking
to some people when I was in Peru this summer about how they weren't able to afford to eat quinoa anymore, so they're replacing that part of their diet with something else and selling quinoa.
That is happening. You see the consequence of something, I mean, the price goes up, and the quinoa that you used to eat, you are eating less because it's better to buy it, to sell it. That's happening, I'm sure. I don't have statistics, but that surely is happening. Any question, please, or comment? Yes, please.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
How does quinoa production in Peru compare to Bolivia?
Yeah, that's very interesting. Peru did a larger effort to have organic quinoa than Bolivia, first. And second, we had more possibility to replace land with quinoa than Bolivia. As a consequence, both increased, but Peru had a larger share in the increase in the production worldwide of quinoa.
And does Peru still produce more organic quinoa
Than Bolivia. And I want to make a comment about the organic.
Yeah.
Organic meant, for example, that when it arrives to San Francisco or Los Angeles, they will check for plaguicides. And they found plaguicides. As a consequence, prices were again down because they put a reduction in price of that. So that's fragile, however. Yes, Michelle.
So I'd like to go back to Joe's question. And you answered it by saying that, if I can put words in your mouth, my words in your mouth, that the dairy producers in the Andes needs to be more competitive so that they can make a living in the face of international competition, because you can call the importer and get milk from New Zealand. Okay. I'd like to dig this a little deeper than that, because forget about international market. Just look at Peru. The milk that you consume in Lima, where does it come from? And the milk that's consumed in Cusco, where does it come from?
I can ask you maybe in another way. I am consultant to the main buyer of milk, and the main buyer is the one that sells in Lima. So what are his decisions, to buy in the Andes or to buy in the coast? They say, I buy where it is cheaper for me. And where is it becoming to be cheaper? In the coast. Because as more technology supply, you reduce prices, cost, and you are close to the market. So and you can work with a producer of 1,000 cows. In the Andes, you have 3 cows, the cost of collecting it, and then transporting to Lima for processing is becoming to be less favorable for the highland production and more favorable to the industrial production in the coast.
Supplementary question. So so Cusco, everybody knows, right, is the Andes, right? So, and Lima is on the coast. So Carlos, what is the price milk to the consumer in Lima and in Cusco?
In Cusco it's higher than Lima. Okay. But it comes from the coast. I mean, the milk is producing in Cusco, the milk is transferred to the coast and goes back to Cusco. Those are realities of some markets.
One last question.
Please.
Earlier in the presentation, you said that, I don't know if you were just making an example, but I think you said that there were only 2 companies processing milk from
80% of the milk, 2 companies, and one of them 60 and the other 20.
Okay.
So it's a oligopoly, isn't it? That's the way you call? Oligopoly? That's an oligopoly. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. You are invited to Peru. Yeah.